A hot but exhilarating day on the open water ends in disaster for one Queensland Park and Wildlife Service ranger. As he and his fellow colleagues finish a day full of research and maintenance, they take a refreshing dip in the ocean to cool off. Little do they know that a shark is on the prowl, yards from the boat. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying great white shark attack on Robba. Welcome to Final Affliction. The year 2020 may be etched on people's minds across the globe for the beginning of the COVID pandemic. But for those in Australia, the start of the year was more memorable for another reason: shark attacks, and lots of them. Northwest Island is a picturesque, sandy, low-level island protruding out of the sea along the southern Great Barrier Reef. The pristine white sands cover just 1 square kilometer of land. It is considered an important nesting ground for more than 500,000 seabirds, as well as for green and hawksbill sea turtles. But the tiny island also holds a dark secret. Secluded at one end of the spit of land lies a small grave, surrounded by a neat, paling fence and marked with a hand-engraved wooden cross. It seems danger and death surrounded this island before, and it would surround the island again. From the very end of the year 2019, on December 30th, a man who was snorkeling the Great Barrier Reef around Northwest Island was approached by a shovel-nosed shark. It suddenly lunged at him, biting his lower leg. As he wrestled with it, pushing it away, it clamped down onto his hand. When it finally released the man, he frantically swam back to his boat where he was airlifted to Gladstone Hospital. He lived to snorkel another day. But the attacks continued after another incident took place just a couple of months later in the crystal-clear Northwest Island waters. People were urged to exercise caution, but for 23-year-old Robba, the waters off the Queensland coastline were his place of work. He had secured a job as a ranger with the Queensland Park and Wildlife Service. It was his dream job, something that he had aspired to since he was young. As a little boy, Zach was always fascinated with the natural world. He spent his entire childhood outdoors, climbing trees, collecting insects, picking up lizards, and looking for frogs. His other love was for the ocean, and he began snorkeling as soon as he learnt to swim. Floating on the surface of the ocean, staring in wonder at the underwater world below him. He graduated from Queensland's Iona College in 2014, a popular boy who was well-liked amongst peers. When he was given the opportunity to volunteer with the Rangers at Manly, he jumped at the chance and never looked back. He was eager to learn and dived right in. Whether he was tasked with scrubbing the bottom of boats or conducting seabird surveys, he always did it with great passion and enthusiasm. But this passion and enthusiasm for the ocean and all that lives in it would tragically lead to his demise. In the previous year alone, 8 people were killed by sharks in Australian waters, more than any other country in the world. And now, it seemed, they were being drawn to Northwest Island. Surrounded by the Great Barrier Reef, the island is home to a plethora of marine species. Sharks frequent the area in search of easy prey along the coral reef, but this year was exceptional. More and more sharks were observed nearby. As fishermen threw fish scraps overboard and cleaned their fish processing equipment in the sea, the scent of fresh meat wafted on the ocean currents. The island had become popular with tourists and day trippers, many of them fishing from the beaches or from their own vessels. With more human activity in the area, there were bound to be more sharks and more human-shark encounters. On Monday, April 6, 2020, Zach and a group of other rangers headed out to Northwest Island on a chartered boat. Their job for the day was to carry out essential research and maintenance in the area. It was a long day, and when evening approached, the rangers were glad of the chance to relax. Zach and 4 other rangers dived off the back of the boat to cool off in the water. The sun glistened off the sea's surface with the picturesque backdrop of the island just behind. It was the perfect end to an exhilarating and busy day. But what they didn't know was that they had dived into the water just a few hundred yards away from a shark. It heard the commotion from the splashing and swam over to investigate. The vibrations, as the rangers hit the water, spread throughout the water column, their laughter and chatter alerting any predators to their presence. It was over 28 degrees Celsius, 82 Fahrenheit, on the boat, and the coolness of the water was welcome as it engulfed the young workers, refreshing them from head to toe. After splashing about for a few minutes, they headed back to the boat. It was moored up just off the island. They began to climb up the boat's ladder and onto the deck. Zach was at the back of the group, and nobody noticed a dark shadow approaching from the side of the vessel. Just as Zach reached out for the handrails on the ladder, he felt a sharp tug on his leg, and he was pulled backwards into the water. Everyone on board turned and rushed to the back of the boat. There, in the water, Zach was being tugged and yanked from side to side. He cried out as the shark held onto him firmly and dragged him under the water. Those on board screamed, unable to do anything but watch in absolute horror. Seconds later, Zach reemerged, coughing and spluttering, but the shark came back for more. This time it bit him across his chest. He felt like his ribs were going to cave in as the jaws clamped down firmly. Its dark gray body arched out of the water, its dorsal fin protruding through the surface. Zach punched the shark on the head and nose, grappling with it and trying to keep his head above water. Moments later, the shark let go for a second time, and the gravely injured Zach managed to pull himself through the water into the ladder. His friends grabbed hold of his arms and hauled him up onto deck, where they lay him down. Blood oozed from his chest, leg, hand, and elbow, and pooled in the bottom of the boat. He had fought bravely, but now the real battle began. As his friends and colleagues tried to stem the bleeding, emergency services were called. A rescue helicopter with a critical care flight paramedic on board was deployed to the Rangers. It arrived as evening set in, and the sea was transformed from a glistening bright blue to an inky dark black. They kept Zach alive, desperately trying to stabilize him before airlifting him out. It took a significant amount of time to make sure Zach was stable enough for the flight. It was valuable time that the young man didn't have, but it was absolutely necessary if he was to stand any chance of making it to hospital. Finally, he was deemed stable enough to be loaded up into the helicopter. He was flown to Gladstone Hospital in critical condition. As he was rushed to the emergency department, doctors and surgeons tried desperately to save his life, but his injuries had been too extensive, and he lost his fight at 10 p.m. that evening, just 4.5 hours after he had been attacked. News of the tragedy spread far and wide. Messages of support for Zach's family poured in. It was clear what a remarkable young man Zach had been, and how many lives he had touched during his short life. Due to COVID restrictions, Zach's funeral was limited to a small group of close family, but was streamed online for all to see. It was a moving tribute to Zach. Following the tragedy and the earlier attacks in the same area, the government has enforced changes to the management of the seas around Northwest Island. Fishermen are no longer allowed to throw their unwanted fish products overboard or clean their equipment in the vicinity. This activity has been seen as an attractant for sharks, therefore posing significant risk for water users in the area. Sadly, these changes came too late for Zach, who tragically met his final affliction.